Welcome back to our study on the book of Romans. This is session number 40 in our Sonship orientation. We were looking last time at a lot of scriptures, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on that, but we're looking at that you're going to be brought unto a perfect man, and those are going to be all through the pastoral epistles, and Paul talks about that in his writings, and we're going to talk more about that at another time. I just want to kind of point that out to you and understand that that's the goal where we're all headed toward. But I want to take you back to that where we first started in Timothy, where he says, but exercise thyself rather unto godliness. And when you think about exercise, you think about exertion, don't you? I mean, anytime. In fact, if you go to the gym to exercise, you don't usually say, I'm going to exercise. You say, I'm going to do what? Work out. And because it is effort to do that. And to exercise yourself unto godliness is going to take some time and effort as well. And that brings us right back to where we got off on when we started this, and that is the commitment that the son is going to have to make to the education that's going to be provided for him. And any church that does that, and let me just be honest, any church that does this is not going to be looked at as a normal church. I promise you. In fact, it may be even looked at in a bad light. But what we're doing may be correct, and it may be godly, it may be toward that end, but it will not necessarily feel like what people think church feels like. And I understand that. But what I want to do now, just having said that, is to take us back now to Proverbs 2, and I want us to read through those first 5 verses together. These verses are designed to test the son's commitment level, and there are 3 ways that this is going to get done. Now, by the way, yes, we're looking at this in Israel's program, so we're not going to look at their doctrine, but I am going to show you there are 3 areas of commitment, and our apostle is going to ask us about these same areas. And the reason I'm showing them to you this way is so when you get familiar with it here, when you get over to Paul's epistles, you'll be able to identify exactly what's taking place over there. And as we read through this, what I'd like for you to do is notice the if phrases that are located here. So here it is, Proverbs 2:1. My son, if thou wilt receive my words and hide my commandments with thee, so thou incline thine ear unto wisdom, and apply thine heart to understanding. Yea, if thou criest after knowledge, and liftest up thy voice for understanding, if thou seekest her as silver, and searchest for her as for hid treasures, then shalt thou understand the fear of the Lord, and find the knowledge of God. Now, actually, we're going to read up to verse 9 a little later on, but I want to kind of focus on those first 5 verses, because in these, and what we're going to find is the beginning of these commitment areas that we're going to have to make. The son is going to have to make a commitment. In fact, the first commitment that he's going to make is going to have 3 components to it. Now today, we're not going to be able to get through all 3 of these components. But what I do want to do is talk about the first commitment that we are going to see here, and we're going to see the breakdown of that commitment. Now, as we read through that, did you notice the if phrases in there? Let's go back and let's just kind of, in fact, let me just look ahead and see if I broke these down on the PowerPoint. You know, I don't guess I did. So let's do it like this. Let's go back and just look at this. Here's the first if. My son, if thou wilt receive my words and hide my commandments with thee, so that thou incline thine ear unto wisdom and apply thy heart to understanding. There's that first if in verse 1. And I'm just going to kind of go through this with you here generally in your notes. Well, you know, if this, I don't think it'll be confusing to you, but if you need to look at this more carefully, then you can look at the notes and go through that. But I want you to notice that the first if is, if thou wilt receive my words and hide my commandments with thee, so that. That so that is talking about the extent to which you do verse 1. Do you see what I'm talking about there? When he says, if you'll do this, so that you wind up inclining your ear unto wisdom and applying your heart to understanding, there's the extent to which that first if is going to carry you. Now let's just do this. Let me just put it up here like this. Proverbs chapter 1, verses 1 through 5 is a commitment to something. Now I'm going to put it into a single word because you're going to have to make two commitments. And briefly put, the first commitment is to learning. Proverbs 2, 1 through 5 is still the commitment to learning. Proverbs 1, 1 through 5, that's the table of contents, right? Okay. So there is a commitment to learning the education. And that is, in fact, and let me just put this in parenthesis here. That's the first part. Now what follows this in Proverbs 2 is going to be a description of the second commitment. And that second commitment is going to be to effectual working. Does anybody want to give me the word that's going to go in parenthesis there? Okay, make sure I'm doing it right. I need a single word. By the way, I talked about both of these. I told you we didn't spend time on it, so I'm really not, going to be totally surprised if nobody comes up with it. But these words are not synonyms, and I haven't used them as synonyms. And actually, I just made an off-the-cuff statement one time where I told you these are not the same, but I keep using two different words. Well, yeah, that's close enough. It's edification. There's an education and there's an edification. Now when you start using these 50-cent words, this is where most people's eyes roll back in their heads and they lose consciousness for the rest of the session. Don't do that. Here's what by the way, Wanda told me after what I did to her in the first session, she's not coming back anymore. So anyways. But yeah, consider part of your suffering with Christ. Yeah. Thanks, Gloria. You're off the hook on the... Okay, there you go. You have an education, but you also have an edification. Can you let me, and to identify the difference here, one of these are things you're going to learn. The other one means now you know how to take that and put it into practice. Yeah, to use it. Because you can learn about something, and if you never do it, what good did that do you? Not really any good. And so, but to get it, these are the two commitments that a son is going to have to make. And as I was just showing you those if clauses in Proverbs 2, 1 through 5, there's a breakdown. This first one, right here, breaks down into three parts. And those if clauses have to do with the three parts of your commitment to learning. And the son is going to do something. Now with that in mind, let's read through this again. And I want you to see in your mind, if you can begin to think about, what is my commitment to learning as I'm looking at this? And again, when we get back to Romans 8, our apostle is going to challenge us just this way. So here we go. My son, if thou wilt receive my words and hide my commandments with thee, so that thou incline thine ear unto wisdom and apply thine heart to understanding. Now what do you think it means when he says, incline your ear unto wisdom? Okay, I'm going to put both of those. It means you have to want to learn it. You're inclining your ear toward it. And one of the first things that's going to be done for you is to show you some things that will cause you to really want this education. Now, I'm kind of preaching to the choir in this group because you waited forever to get to Romans 8. Now you're waiting forever to get back to Romans 8. And I know you want it. But what the Father is going to do is give you some things that you will, as you're going through this, will make it so that you don't become bored with the education, that you don't get tired of it, and that instead of your initial excitement tapering off, that it's actually going to build through your sonship life. And why does it have to be that way? There's a reason. Because the satanic policy of evil is going to put some things in front of you to wreck your sonship life. He is going to distract you and allure you away with something that's going to take your time and attention so that you don't get the education. That'll be one of the first things that will happen. So that's because of that danger. The Father wants to make it so that you really want this. You incline your ear unto wisdom. In other words, I'm really listening to get this. I want it. By the way, if I could tell you this, I saw this happen. It was kind of an unusual thing. I want to say 2 times back. Were you there 2 Tuesdays back, Pam? You weren't. Just this past one. 2 Tuesdays back in Glen Rose, I got right to the end of the second session, and we were, and we're in Romans 8 about verse 9, so we're still in sanctification. They're still dealing with these 2 things. We're almost done with it. I think we're 41 and 42, and there's only 46 sessions in that. So we're almost to the end, but we got right to the end of the session. And I said, and I can't even remember exactly how it segued into that, but I stopped and I just said, look, let me just show you how this works. And I just went over to the board. Now, everybody's listening. They are. They're listening. And it's not that there's a bunch of extra stuff going on. There's not. But they're taking notes. They're like you do, they write stuff down. But I go over to the board and I write some things up on the board. Now it's things that they're really not going to encounter until they get into sonship. But I'm just trying to make a point about something. And when I wrote that on the board and I was talking while I was writing, I know you don't think I do that very well, but I did that. And when I turned back around to finish making the point, it was as though everybody in the room had moved to the front of their seat. And you know how you kind of turn your head, and it was pin drop quiet. Nobody was moving a muscle. And it when I looked at it, it wasn't that it was noisy before. It was different. Do you know what they were doing? They were inclining their ear. Because they, like you, had been waiting to get to Romans 8:14 to say, show me about my sonship. And when they were going to get that, it was remarkable to me. It almost made me pause. It was so different for a moment. Now, I'm really thankful for that because you know what that is? That's an indicator. That's an indicator that they're really looking for that. But there has to be something they get that takes them further than that. Because right now, they're in that initial stage of, we just know there's something out there called sonship, and they haven't had any of these 40 hours that you've had in orientation. So that's still ahead of them. But my point is, at this place, they're going to now begin to get something that's going to carry them further and cause their expectancy to continue, because they're going to be faced with something that if they don't see it that way, they're going to say to themselves, well, this isn't the big deal I thought it was. Then they kind of move off of it And that's the strategy of the plan of evil, to be able to make that to happen. Now, the second commitment is to the effectual working of the doctrine. This is the doctrine you're going to learn. And this is that doctrine effectually working in your inner man. And that means that you're going to know how to actually put that into use in your everyday life. So those are the two commitments. Now for me, there's a third commitment. Because I not only have to have the commitment to education and the commitment to edification, but I have to make a commitment to teach it. And that requires something different out of me. Right now, you just have to make those two commitments, that I'm going to do it. And it's more than just showing up here and sitting in the seat. Have you ever taught a class of any kind where there were bodies sitting in the seats, but their mind was somewhere out in the stratosphere? And it's easy to do. It is. In fact, you have to kind of be careful, because a single word can make a memory come into your head, and all of a sudden you've chased that memory down for 5 minutes, and then you kind of come to and you realize, where are we? You ever done that? I know what you're thinking. Yeah, we do it every Sunday. You're right. Okay, I get it. But with these commitments that the Son is going to make, and he's going to talk to you about it, and those commitments are not just going to come out of a vacuum. He is actually going to ask you to make those commitments based on his track record with you. Okay, now that's going to take us. I'm going to take you back over now, and I think that this next one. All right, now here's session 40, and we're going to talk about the 3 measures of the Son's commitment. And let me see if this is going to take us further. It is. Let's read this again, and this time let's take it through verse 9, because this is really a whole compartment or packet of information. My son, if thou wilt receive my words and hide my commandments with thee, so that thou incline thine ear unto wisdom and apply thine heart to understanding, if thou criest after knowledge, yea, if thou criest. You know what yea does? It ups it a notch. Can you see how the yea would do that? So he's saying the first is if you can do this, and then it's like, and really, yea, if, so he's kind of upping it a little bit, thou criest after knowledge, and liftest up thy voice for understanding. Now wait, who is crying after knowledge? And who's lifting up their voice? You're not, and you're going to do that, not in this assembly, but you are going to do that in front of your Heavenly Father. There is a place in the curriculum in which you're going to get, this is a testing point. I hate to use the word test because nobody likes that word, but it really is a testing point in which you're going to be shown something, and your Heavenly Father is going to wait to hear from you, yes, I want to do this. I really want to do this. Because when you come here, that's your commitment to the education. What you do when you go home is going to be your commitment to the edification. And your Father, when you go home, is going to want to hear that from your lips. As a matter of fact, He's going to ask you about that point blank. And you're going to have to give Him that answer. Now, that's not a scary thing. I'm trying to, shake anybody up with that. Really, it just ought to be that way. It actually makes sense for it to be that way. All right, let's continue reading verse 4. If thou seekest her as silver and searchest for her as for hid treasures. Well, what is he talking about here? If you seek her as silver and search as for hid treasures, what is he talking about? All right, and how badly would you desire it? What's he talking about when he's talking about silver and hid treasures? Yeah, it's got value to it, doesn't it? And he's saying, if someone reliable came to you and said, you don't know this, but buried in your backyard is some, a chest of silver coins. Would you go dig it up? I mean, after they left? Would you? I knew what was on your mind. Would you go dig it up? Linda's looking at me like, what silver coins? Crystal, go get Mommy the shovel. All right. If there's value, would you just leave it laying in the ground? No way. No way. In fact, you know what? You'd keep searching to make sure you got it all, wouldn't you? This is what your Father says. This is how I want you to view this education. I want you to search for it like that. Like it has that kind of value to you. Now, verse 5, if you do those three things, here comes the then. Then shalt thou understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. Now, wait a minute. Didn't we run into that thing on the fear of the Lord before? Where did we find that? Back in Proverbs 1, didn't we? Let me see what this next verse is on the PowerPoint. No, we've got to finish reading it. Let's read it, and then we'll come back and talk about it, okay? Because I've got the whole passage up here. That understanding the fear of the Lord is actually an advancement from something you found over in chapter 1. Do you remember what you read about that in chapter? I mean, let me just say it. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of, there you go. And what was that? Well, we'll talk about it when we get over there. Verse 6. For the Lord giveth wisdom, out of his mouth cometh knowledge and understanding. He layeth up sound wisdom for the righteous. He is a buckler to them that walk uprightly. I'm going to give you part of your homework assignment now. Find out what a buckler is. When you find out what a buckler is, this passage will mean more to you than it does right now. He is a buckler to them that walk uprightly. He keepeth the paths of judgment and preserveth the way of his saints. Then shalt thou understand righteousness and judgment and equity, yea, every good path. Look at that last verse. Anything sound familiar there? Wow. Aren't those four decision-making skills that you found over there in Proverbs 1 in verse 3? Wisdom, justice, judgment, and equity. Remember earlier we saw two of them. Now you see this list, and equity is in the list. Remember I told you sometimes you get these, sometimes these. Those are the things that he's laying out before you. Okay, now let me just see which of these I want to give you. I want to get you back over to, that's the breakdown of the ifs. There's the first if in verses 1 and 2, the second if in verse 3, the third if in verse 4, and then the result of meeting those three ifs. Now, because you see a then, normally when you think of the if then, what are you thinking about? You're thinking about Israel, for sure. And what particularly about Israel? Yeah, the blessings and cursings of the law. I want to be clear. This is not the if-then of the law. The if-then of the law was the contract for blessings and cursings. This is an if of maybe you will and maybe you won't. But if you do, there is a benefit, and that is understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. And we'll come back and talk about exactly what that means, but I just want you to see that because you saw if, and then, this is not the contract of the law. That's something a little bit different. All right, now let's go back. I'm sorry, I did that Proverbs 1:2 again. Here it is, 1:7. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. That's what we talked about a while ago. Here's why I'm here. Here's the then on those commitments. Then shalt thou understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. The fear of the Lord that you had in Proverbs 1:7, does anybody remember what that was? Wow, y'all are good. I did not really think you would remember that. Did we spend time on that? Y'all are just smart, aren't you? Y'all really are good. It is that reverence that you have just from your father's reputation, that if he thinks this is a big deal, I better pay attention to this. This is a big deal. But it's just based on that. And that's what you're looking at there. Now, and by the way, you want to see what that is in your epistles? That kind of fear of the Lord? That he says something and you go, man, just because he said it, I have enough respect for God, my Heavenly Father, that if this is an issue to him, this is an issue to me. Here it is. For as many as are led by the Spirit of God, they are the sons of God. For you have not received the spirit of bondage again to fear, but you have received the spirit of adoption, whereby you cry, Abba, Father. That's where that is in your epistles. And why is it that way? Because if your father thinks it's important enough to come along and tell you, I've made you an adopted son, even though you don't know everything there is to know about it, just out of sheer respect and reverence for your Heavenly Father, that kind of fear, if he thinks that's a big deal, I think that's a big deal. But like everything else, he wants to carry that a little further so that you're seeing something more than just, by the way, what is it that every child, really, as child, but I mean, what is it that every son or daughter feels if they have that kind of respect for their father? Yeah, admiration. And you don't want to disappoint them. You ever been there? I just don't want to disappoint my dad. I can remember thinking something one time, and I thought, yeah, that's what I think about that. And I heard my dad say just the opposite. And you know what I thought? Well, I guess I won't be thinking that anymore. Because I didn't want my dad to look at me and think, that's how you think? Now, just out of that, you know, that changed the way I thought about it. Now, but that initial fear of the Lord is going to have to grow. And it's going to have to become something else. It's going to have to go from just, well, I was going to use that knowing wisdom and instruction to perceiving the words of understanding, but I don't want to confuse you with all of that. What I'm going to do is it is going to take you to a point where you're going to realize that what you're about to get involved in is a lifetime issue. And that it is going to take a real commitment on your part in order to go through this. And that means that initial fear of the Lord, that just says, you know, because he says it's important, I don't want to disappoint him, is going to change, and now it's going to, this other fear, the Proverbs 2 fear of the Lord, is now saying, I know enough about it now that I want this for myself. You see how it's gone beyond, okay, my dad thinks it and I don't want to disappoint my dad, to now, I really see there's something to this and I really do want it for myself. Do you see how that's an advancement on that? And really, that's the way that's going to go. And that's why we looked at that 1 Timothy issue about exercising yourself under holiness. Because that really is about the increased aspect of the fear of the Lord. Okay, now, there was a couple things that I wanted to do here before we got away from this, and that was, let me just look and see where we're going with this. I want to talk about that first commitment inside the commitment to learning. So here it is. My son, if thou wilt receive my words and hide my commandments with thee, so that thou incline thine ear unto wisdom and apply thine heart to understanding. And I'm going to encapsulate all of this into a single phrase. And here it is. He's going to use that word attend. Remember we looked at that about a week or so ago? He talked about attend unto, and we talked about attendance. I'm going to put it under this banner of honest attendance. Is there such a thing as dishonest attendance? There is. And when we come back next time, I know you've been waiting for this. You haven't said anything, but I see your faces. Do you remember about 3 sessions back when I told you we were going to come to a place where I was going to explain that statement that the Apostle Paul made about silly women? Do you remember that? And I told you there was a particular aspect of the policy of evil that was directed mainly against women. It wasn't that men couldn't be victimized by that, but for a particular reason, this was mainly aimed at women. And women who did fall victim to that policy of evil, Paul uses this label of silly women. Now, that will be the first thing that we're going to look at when we come back next week. And the reason is because I have to set this up in the remainder of... I know you think I'm putting it off one more time, but I told you it would be a while we would get there. And now here we are. But, y'all are terrible. I'm so sorry you have to see this like this. But, But, oh, that's clever. I'm going to act like I didn't even hear that. All right, now look. Because... I'm giving you the setup for it here. And that, by the way, did anybody go and look at that and figure out what that was? Because he's not just being critical. He's not just saying silly women like, oh, you're just silly. That's, there's something specific in mind with that. But here's the setup for it. That there has to be honest attendance on your part to be able to get the education. Now, I'm going to just wrap this up in a few little short, simple things. First of all, honest attendance means we can't shortcut the process. Honest attendance means you can't just because you show up here doesn't mean that's the end of it. Right? Now, I know that right now that's what you're doing. I know. But when the education actually cranks up, and that's why I talked about this commitment to learning is going to involve time. That means if you're going to get it, you're going to have to show up and go through the curriculum. There's no way around it. And so honest attendance is, I'm not only showing up in body, I'm showing up in mind. I am inclining my ear unto wisdom. I am applying my heart to understanding. I am thinking about these things. And that's what those things are about. And when we're talking about, under this label, honest attendance, that's what I'm referring to. That we're not just, it's Sunday, it's a church day, that's what we do. We go to church, we kind of punch the clock, and then we go home. There's quickly coming a time in which that is no longer going to be able to work. And that's why sonship will never be the prevalent thing that's out there. Because most people are very happy to be able to show up for services on Sunday, listen to whatever it is that's being said, and then go home, and they don't think about it again until the next Sunday rolls around. And they like that. And if you say to some people, you're going to have to exercise yourself unto godliness, well, you might as well said go to Gold's Gym and work out. Because they don't want to do that. That is going to take an effort. And folks, I'll tell you now, it takes an effort on my part, and it's going to take an effort on your part. And the truth of the matter is, I have to go through that effort before you do, because I really have to understand how that works. I can't just give it to you like it's some kind of academic exercise. I really have to understand the practical use of that in my life. Now, so my attendance, it has to be honest. I have to really show up, and I have to really apply myself, and I have to really think about it. And that's what's going to happen with us as well. And I think you get that part. And, there was a little deal, I made a note, and I just kind of glanced at it there, but if you were to say, Do you really want to get this? When you say that to most any group, you know what the answer that's being thought of is? Well, I'm here, aren't I? But that's the problem. Just being here isn't it. Okay, now I keep saying that to you, and you know that when I beat a horse this many times, it's because it's important, and it has to do with this. Because when we come back in the next time and we go over to Timothy, what I'm going to show you is an example of dishonest attendance. Even in Timothy's own assembly, there were people who showed up and were there, and they heard it, but they had a response to it. And that's the response that earned that label. Now, again, we'll detail that the very first thing off the bat when we come back. And although the Bible gives us that example, what your Father would rather you understand is, if you look at this that He's offering you as though it doesn't really have any value, if you're looking at this as though it's not that big a deal, if you're looking at this any way like that, you are being victimized by that policy of evil in your thinking. You really are. That doesn't mean you want to be, doesn't mean you're trying to cooperate with it, but I'm saying it is being successful against you. It's just like when I told you before, if anyone hears about sonship and says, I don't want that, I don't care what their reason is. It doesn't matter. And I'm not saying they're trying to be a bad person. That's not it at all. But I don't care what their reason is. If someone sees sonship and says, that's not for me, I don't care what the reason is, they have been victimized by the policy of evil. It's been successful against them. Because all it's after is to get you and me to walk away from this, and it doesn't matter to Satan why. Doesn't matter. And if you need a reason, he'll give it to you. And actually, you know what? We usually don't need him to give us one because we'll invent them on our own. And you know, when those happen, I'll just give you a heads up. When those happen, we usually don't give one, we give four. In case one of those I gave wasn't good enough for whoever we're telling it to. You know, when someone calls in sick, yeah, I'm not going to make it to work today, I'm sick. And besides, the daycare is, and then they start adding things to it. You know what you're really finding out? Yeah, they weren't sick. It's, I don't know, it's the adult version of what the kids use when they go to school and they go, I lost my homework. The dog ate it. That's a good one. The dog ate my homework. Man, if that was really happening to somebody's dog, hefty. That dog was eating a lot of homework. Smart dog. And you know what? When you're a kid, you think that works. You know what? And that's why your Father is going to test your level. Now you're beginning to see why it's important for your Father right off the bat to test your level of commitment. And to say to you, really and truly, where is this with you? All right, now look, don't panic today. Do you know why? Because you're not looking at your exhortation in Romans. Right now, I'm showing you this is what to expect to get back over there. So when we get back over there, all of us will have in our mind, you know what? I know what's coming up next. I know what he's going to do. He's going to show me something about the creature and my job in it that is supposed to set my attitude to say, wow, this is really big and really important. And then right after that, he's going to do something to test how committed I am to this. And I'll tell you now, at the end of Romans 8, he is going to do that with all of us in 5 probing questions. And when I talk about probing questions, I'm talking about, this is the equivalent. First of all, you won't be able to fake these answers. First of all, you won't be giving them to me at all. You'll be giving them to your Heavenly Father. He is going to perform open heart surgery on every one of us. You know, I was having a conversation where somebody said somebody was going through and they were saying they were for the first time in a long time really looking at how things were, and they weren't really liking that. Here's what was going through my mind when I heard that. When we get to the Romans 8, your Father's going to lay you down on the table, and He's going to open up your heart, and He's going to ask you 5 questions that you're going to answer, and He's going to show you what's really there. And from that, you're going to say, I've either made the right kind of commitment that's going to take me through this, or I haven't had honest attendance. I've just kind of been going through the motions. Because don't we really want this to work? All right, now I'm going to end with this. What you are about to engage in, what we're being oriented to right now, is what every saved person is really looking for. I'm not trying to be ugly. You have seen me be ugly. This isn't it. I'm just being honest as I know how. As well-intentioned as all of that is, all of those things that come out, that sweep through our churches and through Bible study groups, is a search to really find that thing that we know we're supposed to have, but we really can't identify it or put our finger on it. We just know we're looking for that and we need that. And you've seen in your own lifetime a series of these kinds of Bible studies that get produced that just sweep across. You remember that deal about knowing God? Years ago came out, and it was kind of like a workbook, and it had a textbook, and you'd go through and you'd look up verses and you'd write things down, and people would work through knowing God. And then Rick Warren came out with the purpose-filled life, and then people began to do that. And then Joel Osteen came out with your best life now, and everybody got those things, and they began to work through those things. And then, someone else came out with, and there was a number of those things. I'm not saying anybody came up with those for a bad reason. They knew the body of Christ, themselves included, needed something. But at the end of that, no one ever came out of the end of any one of those and said, thank God I now have what I need. As soon as the next one came out, they jumped on it. Because they knew. Do you know this? You said, well, you're saying this is it? This is it. You said, well, why don't you write it down? Because it's already written. This is it. When you get through with this, you will say what no one else has said with any of those studies. You have been brought unto a perfect man. There is nothing more to add, and there is nothing more to improve. The only thing for you to do now is put it into practice. You'll have gotten everything you need from your Heavenly Father. And then all those other things that made everybody just say, boy, this is going to be great because it holds out the this is the only thing that holds out the promise of that. Folks, I've done all those things too. I went through all those things. I did all that work. I even created one of those for myself to work through. I thought this is, I've got to devise a way for people to get this. And my Heavenly Father was saying all the time, hey, buddy, I've already done that. Just do what I've done. Just follow my curriculum. Go through my course. So now that's what we're doing. So I'm not saying that egotistically. I didn't write this. I didn't invent this. And if it had been up to me, I wouldn't have written it because I tried to do one. It didn't look anything like this. In fact, I don't ever want you to see what I created. But your Father has something that is incredible. And at the end of it, you won't be lacking at the end of that, you will have finally gotten that which you knew on the inside you wanted all along. That's where this is taking us. And I'm just saying it that way because in an honest attempt to get there, we're doing it the best way men know how to do it. But I think we ought to do it is do it the way our Father knew how to do it, because that's what really effectually works to produce that in us. That's what builds you up. Okay, there's a whole lot more I could say about that, but I don't have time to do that. So what we'll do is we'll come back next time and we'll talk about